we've seen in the UAE very clear direction laid out by the government for ways to improve our security and, clear objectives and targets that we have in the near future. Now, innovation in agriculture and AgTech have been identified as a way for us to accelerate our food security. For two key reasons, both in response to food provision challenges, but also in response to sustainable resource management. So if you, look at some of these figures here, around the projected size of the global indoor farming market and specifically indoor vertical farming market in the Middle East and then the UAE, we actually see very, very strong global and local industry growth projections. And the UAE specifically is investing quite heavily in the local indoor agriculture ecosystem. So Madar Farms is one of 4 companies to have received support from Abu Dhabi Investment Office, ADIO, in 2020. And we are the only local company to have received this support. So we can really see a strong commitment from the government in accelerating AgTech in Abu Dhabi and the UAE. So obviously, we are all living through the COVID-19 pandemic, which has posed, many challenges and prompted governments to make a lot of strategic and tactical decisions to support the nation. And what we've seen from COVID-19 when it comes to food security is, quite an intense food system shock globally. And what this has done at the local level is really exposed infrastructure gaps in our food security. And we've seen a very strong and coordinated strategic response from the UAE government to try and ensure long-term self-reliance. And actually using this as a real opportunity to kind of accelerate our strategic response to food security challenges that we have here. And it also provided, a wonderful opportunity for local farms like Madar and others who work in this industry to showcase these long-term solutions to food security in the UAE. And we've seen lots of, initiatives and advancements in the sector. So a little bit about Madar, enough on the context. So we are a local company on a mission to help drive food security in the GCC. So we take a holistic approach to sustainability. So we focus on 3 key pillars in our business to support our mission. So number 1 is growing, which is obviously core to our commercial business. We are growers, we are farmers, we produce, local food for our community. And we are currently farming at a smaller scale in our containerized facilities in Masdar city, but our new farm, our large, commercial scale farm, is currently under construction at KIZAD, so Khalifa Industrial Zone, Abu Dhabi. And this farm is the world's first commercial scale indoor tomato farm that uses only LED, so no sunlight. And then, we are also using our Masdar city facilities to conduct R&D, and R&D is also, crucial to our long-term growth strategy, and that will be expanding as well. And Kyle's going to talk a little bit more about R&D later today. And the third pillar is education and community. And this, we have quite a few different pillars across this part of the business. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what we do there. But one of the things we do is we work with universities and we work with the academic community, but we also operate and run, different programs and initiatives for all different community segments. So, growing, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide about this, but, in principle, what we use is a combination of different indoor farming methods to grow produce here in the UAE indoors. We don't use any pesticides or insecticides in our farming. And our farms also reduce land and water use, which are some of the key sort of value proposition components of indoor farming in the UAE. So the farm at KIZAD, which I hope you'll all be able to visit at some point in the future, is designed with sustainable water consumption in mind. So I think it's really important for us to think about food security, and water security is very, very closely linked here. So we have, water recycling throughout our farm, and this farm is primarily focused on tomatoes in the near future and plans for other crops in addition to leafy greens and microgreens. So the 3 indoor farming methods that we use in our farms are hydroponics, so a soil-less growing method where plants acquire the nutrients that they need from the water solutions that they're rooted in. Vertical farming, where you have hydroponic systems that are stacked like floors of a building, and then CEA, or controlled environment agriculture, which is a technology-based approach towards food production taking place within an enclosed growing system where the variables of the plants can be maintained and optimized. And we're a technology agnostic farm, so you know, Kyle will attest that we really look for the best solution for the challenge that we're facing or the needs that we have. So the techniques that we use in indoor farming provide the optimal environmental controls for growing. And there's a spectrum of controlled environment agriculture. So if you look here, you know, there's a spectrum of protected growing and greenhouses, and then there's also indoor farming with optimal environmental controls at this end of the spectrum. And here's a comparison with traditional agricultural methods, so outdoor farming. Now, indoor farming specifically employs a combination of plant science, engineering, and computer and data management. And it's highly suitable for the UAE environment. And core principles are that the techniques that we use in indoor farming, they drive plant health, and they also drive efficiency of production. And crucially, they conserve natural resources and minimize waste. Now, I know there's a lot of detail here, and I know it's sort of a massive diagram, but this is a diagram. Imagine there's a roof on top. It's kind of like a cross section illustrative of what our KIZAD farming facilities will look like. So this has actually been developed, you know, to explain and show people what the kind of process is inside the farm. It shows how we will grow indoors at KIZAD, and, you know, different components of the farm, and kind of a simplified version, I think is the best way to explain it, of how this process works. You know, so here are some tomatoes growing in hydroponics with the lights, you know, here injecting CO2, monitoring the temperature, the humidity, and the CO2 levels in the farm, and, you know, process here for water and nutrients, etc., for the farm, and climate computer. So I'm not going to labor this too much, but what's important about this is that this is actually a model that can be scaled in line with, you know, the demand and different growing locations and needs in the future. So the growing methods that we use at Madar, they also allow us, these agronomic practices that we use, they also allow us to impact the nutritional value of our fruit and vegetables. So one of the things that we're able to do using indoor farming techniques is actually to prioritize how and what we feed the food that we're growing for people in the UAE. So, for example, we can predetermine and increase and manage the nutrient levels of our plants. We can also control oxygen levels, you know, growing temperature, steer edible biomass, and all of these impact food's quality and nutritional benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, specifically about GCMS, because this is an opportunity for UAEU community to support on some R&D objectives. So, as I said, Kyle's going to talk a bit more about R&D, but as an overview, we conduct in-house research and development, and we also do R&D with different partners. So whether there are international production partners or with different universities where we do more directed experiments. And a great example of an R&D collaboration that we're really excited about is our participation in ADIO's VRI, so the Virtual Research Institute, which Kyle and I have been working closely with Elka and some of her team on, which is, you know, we're partnering with UAEU as a local industry partner to explore and drive food security in the UAE. R&D is crucially also a really fundamental part of the success of an indoor farming business. So it's important for us to make sure that, you know, we're prioritizing and investing in the R&D that we need to grow and be successful. We also, separately from the R&D that we're, you know, doing in our farm and with our partners, as I mentioned, we also are, have been over the last couple of years testing and validating different smaller scale AgTech solutions for community use. So we have an Eco Villa exhibition in Madar City where we have a range of different home growing solutions. We've also tested with schools and universities and hotels and at home, and really trying to understand more about how we can get hyper local food production more highly adopted and more widely adopted in the UAE. So then a little bit about what we do in education and community. The philosophy behind this department of our business is that we have a responsibility to our community to explore and support exploration of both the how and the why of sustainable agriculture or indoor farming. So how does it work? And why do we need it? Why does it matter? What are the challenges that we're trying to address? What are the opportunities here? So our aim is really to drive awareness, knowledge, skills, and different opportunities for people to actually take action and get involved and make positive change. So we offer our Sustainable Futures program to schools in the UAE, which is for KG up to 12, and it's all about growing at school and also learning across the sustainability agenda. And we also operate a range of different community initiatives and programs. Unfortunately, some of those community initiatives and programs have been slightly reduced by some of the restrictions around COVID-19, but we'd love to host you all in our spaces in the future. So just briefly, a couple of minutes on what our plans are as a farm in the future. So we are already currently planning our expansion across 3 key areas. So we're expanding our farm facilities at KIZAD to use more of our plot and to then increase our product portfolio, which is our second area here, looking at more and different products that we're going to grow. And then the third area where we're expanding is R&D. So expanding our in-house facilities to accelerate new product introduction, focusing more on codifying and formalizing partnerships that we need to grow our response to food security challenges. So what we've done over the last sort of 10 months in our business is actually to conduct a very detailed supply demand analysis. So asking ourselves questions like, what in theory could we produce using CEA in the UAE? And qualifying these different food items against different criteria and thinking then against, what is the commercial viability? To what extent is this nutritionally important for the UAE? And kind of asking ourselves all those questions, balancing food security needs and also the sustainability of Madar's own business as well. Now, this analysis that we've gone through has helped us define the future direction of our products and our farm and our strategic roadmap. And we've arrived at a short list of different food items that we're interested in producing in the coming years. And we've also identified how, as a company and as a farm, we can actually be a sort of engine to support the local food system as well. So key things are, expanding it, but also future-proofing it. And I think that's really important to us. Our mission is really to create a powerful multiplier effect for food security in the UAE. So that was a kind of, 20 minutes high level overview. Sorry, Kyle, I went over by a few minutes. I'm going to hand over to Kyle now to talk specifically about R&D at Madar and what we do, why we do it, and some details around that. So Kyle, if you are ready to go, over to you.
Thank you. Just a quick admin note before we get started into this. My internet connection is a bit wobbly this morning, so in case the audio is not clear, somebody please just go ahead and interrupt me and let me know so I can repeat if I need to. Great, so thank you, Tatiana, for the very informative overview. I think that sets the scale nicely to discuss, why R&D is so important for us. One of the big kind of themes in what we do is that, we are innovating, and unfortunately, in the industry, we're kind of innovating in silos or in these pockets because everybody wants to protect their intellectual property. So one of the things we're trying to understand is, are we solving problems for the first time, or are other people maybe solving similar problems elsewhere in the world? And then it's a question of connecting the dots and networking together. So a lot of what we do here in Madar in our facility, where we're calling it R&D, research and development, the focus is really more on the development side. And what we mean by that is, again, it's not so much the, let's say, hardcore scientific endeavors, but it's much more around how do we develop the business? How do we develop the growing aspects to be commercially viable? And that's something that we then scale up as we grow out in the future. Go to the next slide, please.
Sorry. Oh.
Great. So as I was saying, being in an industry which is evolving so quickly, there are very few standards in place industry-wide, and that's standards from growing approaches, from system design, hygiene standards, et cetera. We're all still very much, let's say, we globally trying to figure out what these standards look like. And we do that through, obviously, through networking, through being in touch with other people, going to trade events back in the good old days when we could still do so, and understanding what other people are working on. So as we have here on the right, the main approach of what we do and looking at three key pillars: food, facilities, and farm operations. I'll break each of those down in a second. So looking at the food, that's actually what we're growing. That's what the consumer, the end user, tastes. And again, it's such a neat tool that we have at our disposal because we can control all the environments that go into the plant. We can therefore obviously influence taste, shelf life, freshness, mouthfeel, all these different things that before were simply outputs. Now they become control variables, which is great, but also then it asks a whole bunch of other questions. How do we identify what drives those different outputs, and how do we control those? And to answer that question, then we really look at mainly the facilities. And that's really the core of the R&D focus, which we'll get to on the next slide. So if you were to look at the pie graph there on the right, the biological innovation, that's the growing. So that's 20%. So roughly the 80-20 rule holds here. Around 80% of our efforts are really around, let's say, the system that we use to grow the products. The biological innovation for me, that's probably more around genetic engineering. That's around really looking at the really details of the agronomy. But for me, the big focus is around the facility. And when we start looking at that, then we ask ourselves, how does the facility impact the business response? And that is minimizing inputs, minimizing expenses, minimizing electrical consumption, minimizing water consumption, et cetera, as we have outlined here on the left. And that's an area where I think a lot of the collaborations need to continue to happen. When we look at things like the VRI, for example, that's a question where we'll need a number of disciplines to solve these problems. If we look, again, facility design, what does that mean? That's HVAC, that's architectural, minimizing costs, minimizing the amount of imported products from the facility. Always a question of energy consumption. Do we put solar panels on the roof? Yes or no? What is the most efficient lighting, et cetera? So here we're getting all aspects, all disciplines from civil engineering, architectural engineering, system design, et cetera. It's a very exciting place to work with lots of opportunities basically anywhere you look. If you can go to the next slide, please. So how do we solve all these different problems together? It's first of all about putting ourselves in touch with as many people as possible. That's one of the reasons why we do sessions exactly like today. And we definitely want to encourage anybody in the audience today, not just from the Q&A, but afterwards, please reach out to us. We'd love to extend our network further so we can all keep working together. So how do we solve this problem? So academic, as Tatiana mentioned before, looking maybe using some undergrads or grad students to come work with us to answer specific questions, and we'll give you an example of that at the end of the presentation. Number two, there is the more, say, commercial partnerships. An example of that would be Cheriton. You can see in the lower left of that diagram. Those are the folks in Holland who are designing our facility for us. And we're already doing some great R&D work with them. So that's an example where by partnering with them, we're able to prove out the design, we're able to prove out the technology remotely, and then we're basically lifting that and then putting it here in Abu Dhabi. And then of course, in-house as well. And the in-house side of our R&D branch will continue to grow once we get on board with the VRI in the coming months. So once we've identified our R&D needs, of course, we have to prioritize them. We're a small company. You're looking at a significant part of the management team on this call already today here. So for us, it's very important that we prioritize correctly because we don't have, unfortunately, massive amounts of resources to spare. So we have basically a hierarchy we've established internally. We use a simple matrix where we look at effort versus reward. We basically prioritize and we rank the different areas of interest. Some areas of interest are ones that we can knock over very quickly with a very minimal investment using in-house. Some of them, for example, if we talk about the very broad topic of genetic engineering, that's a multi-year endeavor in which we for certain do not have that capability and will never have that capability in-house. We must partner with people and make that long-term investment. So again, there's a whole spectrum there. We've prioritized that internally. At the moment, we have somewhere between 25 and 30 different topics which we want to look at. Again, some of them are very urgent, very quick wins, and many of them are very long-term focused. Next slide, please. So how do we arrive at that list? This is just a kind of a quick little flow chart. I come from a manufacturing background, so I tend to think in very process-oriented steps. So I'll kind of walk everybody through briefly how we end up getting there. So for us, identifying a problem and opportunity, that comes from a number of places. That comes from our current small-scale farming operations in Abu Dhabi. It also comes from the design of our expansion plan. Even thinking forward to the future, there's a number of opportunities which we can identify now, let's say, digitally, so to speak, without actually having a physical representation in place. And by solving them very, very early on, very proactively, and implementing them into the design, we're avoiding cost in the future as well. So that's a really key focus for us. And then again, thinking back to the scientific method, it's once we've identified a problem, I think there's a lot of value in simply defining accurately, really capturing in words, in pictures, in data if possible, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve, and put some bounds on that, draw some clear lines in terms of that scope. I firmly believe without a well-defined problem, you'll never get to a good solution. Once we know what problem it is we're trying to solve, then we ask ourselves in our network, has this problem been solved elsewhere? I'll give a few examples of that on the following slide. Typically, the answer is no. And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, let's go extend a bit further. And that's typically done remotely these days, looking desktop research, a lot of web surfing, just to find out, has private industry adapted this or not? And this is where we start to get to first one of the black holes. In private industry, we don't have access to all the vast academic research that exists. And this is one of the key benefits in us partnering with universities such as UAEU, is that I'm sure that a lot of the questions we're trying to solve have been solved, or the underlying academic research has been done, but we simply don't have access to that. So that's a quick win where us working together with universities can move forward very quickly. At that point, if we haven't solved the problem, then we really get into an in-depth R&D project internally. And that's the PowerPoint presentation that I highlighted on the previous slide. That PowerPoint presentation, very simply, it's more of a template to get us thinking. It's about getting the thoughts from our minds onto paper, onto a document. Again, by having them written down, it makes it much more tangible, easy to share, and easy to communicate. Following from that, then of course we go to that matrix that I highlighted as well to rank them all. Once it's been ranked, then we get to the more interesting thing of actually assigning people to do that. So turning it into an action plan eventually. And then coming down to the very end, sharing findings. That's an interesting one because obviously, there's always the question of IP looming over our heads. But we believe as a company that, we should contribute, that we're solving problems that are not just applicable to the UAE. Food security is a global issue. Water scarcity is a global issue and will continue to be a global issue. So we also want to be part of that broader conversation and contribute back instead of just being takers. It is a give and take. Move on, thank you. So I'll get into a few case studies briefly of some examples of some R&D work that we've done already. So for in our upcoming facility, the tomatoes we've chosen to grow, as you can see, these are called Côte de Boeuf tomatoes. Traditionally, these are known as one of the most challenging crops to grow across all of agriculture. It's kind of the holy grail, so to speak, in terms of challenge. We've chosen that for a couple of reasons. First of all, because those challenges come from, let's say, environmental variables. Well, we know that we can eliminate those variables in our system, so therefore we can actually decrease that challenge. And we also know as well, because it's so challenging, that they can't be grown in this part of the world because the climate here doesn't support that, nor can they be grown in greenhouses. So we'll be able to carve ourselves out a nice little part of the market to get started here. As we started growing these in Holland, our suspicions were confirmed, even in an indoor environment with some of the best growers and best technology in the world. The first trial was, let's say, marginally successful. The second trial was better, and now the third trial that we're on, we're seeing some great results on that. And I think, again, what that's really confirmed for us is that even the best in the world, the best technology, best systems, there are still significant challenges that we as industry have to overcome. Go to the next slide. Here's an example of looking to other industries. So again, the proverbial not reinventing the wheel. our growing facilities, as one can imagine, is very energy intensive. As such, of course, we have to buy quite a bit of chilling capacity for the facility. So asking the question, well, what other facilities have similar parallels and very energy intensive? Very quickly looking at data centers as an example, very small physical footprint, very high energy footprint. So there's some parallels there. And how do they keep their CapEx minimized? Well, they use thermal energy storage systems or stratified water tanks. So that's something we explored. We talked to some local suppliers for that, got some quotations, ran the energy model, the output there, as you can see. And we came to some great conclusions. And that's going to save us millions in CapEx. And more importantly, it's going to significantly reduce our energy consumption in the long term. And this particular topic for me is a very broad topic about energy management, energy efficiency, which I don't think is getting enough attention currently globally in the indoor space. There's a lot of talk about the latest, greatest LED lights, which are very, very important, but that's also missing a lot of other energy consuming factors such as air handling, the insulation of the building, et cetera. And that's an area where, again, through some localized research, we can make some locally applicable results. Go to the next slide. And then coming to air management, this for me is another very broad topic, but one that I think has tremendous potential for us. So what I've shown here on these slides is a quick overview of how a typical greenhouse is cooled. They use evaporative cooling, which in simple terms means you have what's called a wet wall. So water is basically sprayed across a sponge material or some other material that holds water. The hot, dry desert air is pulled in through that foam, which obviously cools it down significantly as the water evaporates, and it's exhausted out the other side. But you can imagine in the middle of July here, if it's say 45 degrees outside and the humidity is 30%, those wet walls are consuming a tremendous amount of water. And the estimates during those months that the cooling water will far exceed the irrigation water consumption. So that's one of the primary reasons why we've chosen to make the extra investment in actually blocking out the sun in our facility. We don't have transparent panels, because in doing so, we're reducing the thermal loading so much that we don't have to have a wet wall in place. We're obviously relying only on typical mechanical chilling. And through some other innovations we've done there, the trade-off is that the facility itself does cost a bit more. However, the water consumption is the lowest in the world, full stop. We will have, for a tomato facility, we would be the most water efficient farm ever created. And we're doing even further things beyond that to further reduce that water consumption through increased recycling efforts as well. And that's something that's really key for us. And that really goes and underlines why we exist as a company, is that we want to make a difference. And we know that being people who want to lead the way and make a difference often means you pay a premium to do so. But hopefully we're lowering that bar and we're lowering that barrier of entry for people who choose to follow us. We can move ahead.
I think, Kyle, that is the end of the R&D section. Thank you. As we've mentioned, everyone, there's a project collaboration that we are keen to kick off with interested students from UAEU. And this is focusing on nutrient analysis of our microgreens and of microgreens in general. So just to reassure you, there is a research brief already that we can share, or Dr. Elkid can share, and this is just kind of starter for 10 information to give you guys an overview of what it is that we want to do, why and how. So in summary, one of the priority areas for Kyle and his team right now is to capture some robust third-party data to support the claims that we're making about the nutritional value of our products and our microgreens specifically. So our primary objective is actually to use GCMS technology, the GCMS tool, to understand more about the profile and values in our microgreens. So we're growing our microgreens in our containerized facilities in Madar currently. And we do not have access to GCMS technology, but we know that this is, what we need to use in order to conduct analysis on our produce. So in terms of the scope of this collaboration, this is actually something that we want to define in collaboration with whoever's going to be working with us on this research. Specifically, we want to agree, the microgreens that we will sample, because we may look at competitors' products. We may look at other microgreens that are available in the UAE that have not been grown by Madar farms, so that we can actually do a comparative analysis. And then we also, in terms of finalizing what that scope looks like, we would like to have a conversation around whether it's viable to use the GCMS to also look at flavor. So an analysis of flavor, those components of flavor, the qualities of flavor. You know, when we talk to our customers in the UAE, one of the things that matters to people is quality, and that's not just, you know, what does it look like and how long does it last, but also what about that taste? What about that culinary experience? What about the pleasure and the experience that you get, you know, from your food? And especially when with something like microgreens, which have really strong taste, should have very strong taste. So the deliverables for this project are, you know, the list of microgreens varieties that we've talked about, you know, a format for reporting, because obviously we want to have some data visualization. We think that this is going to be more, you know, traditional kind of white paper that we'd really like to produce throughout this project, and obviously have the raw data from the GCMS to back up that analysis. So that's kind of the scope of what's involved in this research project. There is an additional data request that we have, and this is what we're describing as a nice to have. It's not core, as I mentioned, it's more about the nutritional value that we're really looking for. But if it's possible, through the equipment available, to actually quantitatively analyze flavor, then we would really love to try and get some data around that. So looking specifically at how do our growing conditions and the different levers that we can pull, you know, to you know, change and influence, you know, the microgreens themselves, how does that impact flavor? And flavor obviously is something that we want to kind of scientifically look at rather than just kind of subjectively through people's responses. So, you know, some of the comparisons would be, for example, our varieties versus imported around flavor, or different seed producers of the same microgreens variety, and how does flavor differ across there? Or what about nutrient content of the plants themselves as a function of the different growing conditions and those levers that we can pull? Now, Kyle and I will be the first people to admit that we're not chemists, and this is stuff that we know that we want to look into, but we're also aware that there might be limitations when it comes to technology or data that we can gather, etc., etc. So this is an overview of the senior project that we'd like to offer for, you know, collaborative work with students at UAEU. I'm now going to stop. I said we'd be 30 to 40 minutes, so I think we're about time to stop now. And obviously, you know, thank you for having us this morning, and we'll open up to questions from the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tatiana and Kyle, for this very interesting presentation, and I'm sure there are questions or comments from the audience. Yeah, you might just raise your hand maybe if you have a question.
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Zainab, go ahead.
So, good morning, everybody. It was a great presentation, great and informative information about Madar Farm. I've heard about it a lot, and now I know most of the information about it. So, as I understand that you are focusing mainly on the indoor farming, is that right? So you don't have any open field or any, like, even a trail to do that? So you're growing vegetable, mainly, no fruit. So you did not try even fruit production inside greenhouses or such condition? No?
I can speak briefly to that, Dr. Zainab. One of the cool things with the way we're growing is that we can grow just about anything. I mean, people have done trials with mangoes, with date palms, pineapples, anything you can think of growing can be grown indoors. But the point is that we're a commercial business, so we have to be able to grow something for which there's sufficient market demand and willingness to pay a price to justify this cost. So a quick example, if we were to look at basically any fruit, most fruits grow on trees, obviously, and for a tree to reach sufficient maturity, take an apple tree just for example, and that tree will be 6 to 8 years old before it's even making its first fruit. So if I were to grow that in my own facility, I'd be investing in 6 to 8 years of energy, cooling, water, lights, etc., before I get that first apple. So that first apple would cost me literally hundreds of thousands of dirhams to bring to market. So there are certain crops that we believe will never work in an indoor environment, and that's okay. Our view is that the food security as a whole, looking at the whole food basket, what we import into this country, is such a wide plethora of items that we have to pick and choose which ones make sense commercially and which ones would be best kept in the field. Broadly speaking, we see that controlled environment agriculture dovetails very nicely with outdoor agriculture, animal husbandry, aquaculture, as Tatiana mentioned, in the seas. It's all part of the bigger ecosystem, and we just have to kind of pick our battles wisely, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. So hi, Kyle.
Hector, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, that was a really, really good introduction. One of the questions I have is about R&D facilities as a whole. In the country, there's not really space or a construct where people can go and try things out in a controlled environment, right? And so that was mentioned in the previous question. There's a lot of outdoor facilities. There's the UAEU has a great outdoor space for some of the things that you covered. In the plan that you presented, of course, it was an overview, right? But can you give a little bit of a what might be the opportunity for academics who have a project? So what would be the construct for academic collaboration in the space, and what might the space look like? Thanks.
Yes, great question. Tatiana, would you like to speak to that regarding the plans for the facility?
Yes, so Kyle, I think I'll flag the learning lab, but I think that there's also potentially another answer for Hector there around more sterile or, kind of VRI related facilities. But a really interesting development from our side that I'm really excited to share with, the student community and academic community actually is that we mentioned that we have our containerized farms, which are effectively upcycled shipping containers where, Kyle and his team are growing in Madar. Now, once we migrate to our KIZAD facilities, we're actually going to be, transforming one of those container farms into our learning lab. So what this is going to be is it's going to be a fully operational and fully functional CA mini farm, just like is being used, at Madar now to grow and test and validate, etc. But this is going to be something which is actually available, Hector and everyone, for members of the community to come in and conduct real life testing in a real life controlled environment agriculture setup. And crucially, that's integrated, because one of the things that we've noticed from working with different learning communities and educational communities is lots of people can say, I have this sensor, or I have this seed or this light. And so actually what we really want to offer the community is a space where you can have all of those integrated components of AgTech and CEA and hydroponics in one space where you can come and say, I want to test this idea, I want to run this controlled trial, or etc. And that's something that we think is really not available in the UAE right now. And we're really excited by the end of this year to have that up and running for people from different educational backgrounds to come and do testing and learning in a hands-on way. But I think, Kyle, maybe Hector's also looking for something a bit more robust than the learning lab, perhaps.
Definitely. Yes and no, right? Because part of the mission is also, social entrepreneurship and things like that. But, and I understand things are still in the works and stuff, but it'd be interesting, maybe not now, but in the future, to have an opportunity or who to go to get more information regarding, you can talk a little bit about it, Kyle or Tatiana, but what is what is going to be the overall goal of the research facilities and the construct and how to proceed to get more information and talk to people about it.
Great question. I think the framework there would be through the VRI. I think that's we can't really ask for a better opportunity than that, right? That we'll have something here locally available, physically, at least locally, but yet we're internationally connected. So to answer your point, I think one of the kind of key constraints I'm working with is that in our facility, hygiene is one of my principal concerns, not just from a food safety point of view, but honestly from a plant safety point of view, because if those plants were to get sick, obviously that's operationally and commercially very, very damaging for us. But even just more, we have to kind of back up a second and ask ourselves, where are we headed? If you think about something, in the past, you have the traditional green thumb. That name comes from somewhere because you're working with the plant so much that you're actually getting the chlorophyll in your fingers and you actually literally are getting a green thumb. And even with our lead grower, our lead agronomist, who has a very proverbial green thumb, I'm actually coaching him now to take a different view of, you can manage that farm almost remotely. This is really where we're at these days with technology. My view is, in that growing environment, I want to plaster that thing with every sensor you can imagine, because data is dirt cheap to get. And where the bigger needs are is understanding how to make, let's say, a robust plant model. We globally, I think, have a very limited view of really detailed plant responses or a system-based plant response. And that's something where I would love to work with academia. So my view on that is I want to be very transparent with our data. I don't see it as really core IP. I would love to share with a number of people anywhere in the world, really, or through the VRI. Here's the data we're seeing. Help us understand. Why is it that when my temperature went up from 1 degree, that some plants had response A and some plants had response B? That's the kind of questions we can answer. And I think a lot of it can be done remotely. So I probably wouldn't have a lot of people physically in the growing area, but I would very much love to be transparent and share data where we're able to, of course. So that's how I can maybe propose that things would work there.
Hello, thank you, Tatiana and Kyle. Thank you for such a great presentation. This is Ihab Fath Rahman. And I actually would like to thank Dr. Elka to bring to us such presentation on Madar farm. And it is not a typical situation. Other farms, they don't think this wonderful way of incorporating application and be open to collaborate with the others, academia and partnerships. I have a question and a comment. Several times, both of you, Tatiana and Kyle, mentioned the work to be in consideration of the demand and the consumers and the value chain development. Give us some examples. How do you, because this is one of the key challenges or major challenges that face local domestic production of food here in UAE, is that how to compete with such open, tough market in terms of offering products very cheap, as it is coming from large scale operation that they minimize their fixed costs and all what costs them, as a matter of fact, just the operational costs that they have. So give a partnership. Do you have a packaging facility, equipment? How do you work with partners, third party? Give us some examples. And my comments is just elaboration on what Dr. Hector mentioned about facilities. I think you came into the right group. At Masdar, Hector have his lab and work on so many aspects of this microorganisms and so on. But here in our college, we have actually 3 facilities, or rather actually 4. We have the large, oldest experimental farm in the country in Al Fu'a that include soil lab, irrigation system experiments, fruit trees, greenhouses, vegetable nursery, animals. So that, I'm just gonna highlight that you came into the right group when it comes to facilities. The other facility is actually in Falaj Hazza, about 15 minutes drive from our main campus, where we have greenhouses, aquaponic unit, hatchery for fisheries, 4 greenhouses running year round on experiments and where the students are there all the time and so on. The third one is recently, and I wanted to get the excuse from Dr. Mohammed Yafi that we built recently, not yet, I think, fully operational, a greenhouse within campus, in campus. This is actually, rather than 15 minutes, is a 5 minutes walk from our classrooms, where it is, Dr. Elke and Dr. Muhammad can tell you more about it whenever the chance comes. So that this is, the idea is to bring a facility next to classroom where a lot more ongoing activity will be happening soon. So I thought to share this comment about you, and Tatiana and Kyle, thank you again, and back to you to give us a feedback.
Thank you very much. We do look forward to working with you in the future as well. And just to address quickly your point, because it's a very, very valid concern, right? That it's pretty transparent that what we're bringing to market here is not going to be directly cost competitive with some other products on the market here, right? If we look at tomatoes, for example, we get some stuff coming in from other countries at 1 or 2 dirhams a kilo. We'll never be competitive with that, nor do we want to. But I would draw an analogy with the current change we're witnessing in terms of electrification with cars, right? The early adopters, the people who bought the first Tesla Model S's, 10 years ago, they were paying a significant premium for those cars that had mediocre performance already in today's terms, just simply 10 years later. And we're seeing, as that trend is going to continue, that's becoming more available to the markets. There's more competitors. Economies of scale shifting more into that electrification area. The exact same thing is going to happen in our industry. So yes, today we're on that kind of premium price point. I'm fully confident that as us and other people get into the game as well, and we bring those economies of scale in, the price points, the cost of production are going to continue to drop, will become more accessible to everybody. So today's message for us is really around awareness. Is, for people to pay a premium, they have to be aware of the benefits of that premium, right? So that's why our message of sustainability is so important. And we do believe that, again, in a much broader scale, that if consumers will continue to choose to purchase purely on cost alone and not consider wider environmental impacts, that's a much bigger problem. So that's part of why we have the education initiative. That's why we're having these talks today. We want people to think a bit more when you go to make that purchase. Where did this come from? How did it get here? And at what environmental cost did that product get to my plate today? Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have 2 people have raised their hands since a while. I think that's Dr. Nuha and Dr. Khaled, I guess. So Dr. Nuha, would you like to make a start?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Elke. Thank you for hosting this wonderful, very eye-opening session. And thank you, Tatiana and Kyle, for this. I think it's amazing that we're all in silos and everybody's doing different things that really seem to overlap and connect, yet we are not connected in such a very small space. So thank you for reaching out. I have maybe a question and a comment, like Dr. Ihab. I'm filling in for, I'm taking care of student affairs at the college, and I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Food Science. So just for your last point you mentioned for the senior projects, because I don't see any of my colleagues here, so I'm not a food chemist, I'm a food microbiologist, but this senior project regarding the flavor profile of those tomatoes compared to the local ones, I think this is something that's really, really interesting and something that's very doable because we have the instruments, we have the HPLCs, and that can detect the profiles if we know what, from a chemical point of view. So I will convey this to our chemists at the department, my colleagues, and maybe get them to connect with you, because I think this is a really interesting thing for our students to actually do. I apologize that I didn't join from the beginning because, like Kyle, I had issues with my internet connection. So I think I missed a valuable part of the first presentation regarding the students' engagement and community engagement in education, because this is what we're now at a point where we're planning to do these students' interest groups. And we really want to create this global citizenship or global skills in our students, that they're not just aware of the local issues, but that everything, if this Corona has taught us anything, it taught us that we do live in one place and we are all connected and we are all affected by everything. So we want to create this awareness amongst our students of these UNGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and get it as part of their extracurricular activities. We want to enhance their volunteering, you know, that they are part of some groups that have an impact, actual impact. And I'm amazed with this research, the learning labs that you're talking about, this recycling of the containers. That's amazing. And I'm really itching to be part of this as a student body. So yeah, we'd love to connect and to see how we can do this and we get our students engaged. Even this talk about thinking about price, we never think about price, especially our students. I think many of them are here. Nobody thinks of price. It's maybe sometimes, no, the higher the price, the better the quality, and that's what we go for. So there are a lot of things I think we share in terms of community engagement that I would love to connect with you guys and get this as a formal body working in the college.
So firstly, thank you so much for that, the ideal response to our needs around flavor profiling. It's music to my ears to hear that that's something that you guys you know, have the ability to do, and we're really excited for the food science students to participate. And I think if we can talk about, you know, sort of cross-departmental contribution, that would be really fantastic. So definitely let's pick up on that, please, around the senior project. Second thing is you feel free to reach out to me directly over email, and we can have a call and a conversation about how to formalize some you know, educational and community engagement related activities between Madar and your students. That's 100% one of the reasons why we're here, and one of the ways that we, you know, love to serve our community and is kind of my mandate. So please reach out. It's really interesting that you talk about, you know, global connectivity and the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is actually part of the curriculum that we operate. So yes, the curriculum is for students from KG up to 12, but we as a team are quite knowledgeable and have quite a lot of educational and sort of, you know, content and community challenges and things that you can actually use to really stimulate actual action around things like that. So we'd really love to connect offline about opportunities to work together on that. So please reach out to me.
I will. Thank you very much. I will. Thank you.
I'm just going to put my email on the group. And also just a very quick one. Someone asked, where will the research lab be? As in LA. The learning lab that we are converting this year will actually be at KIZAD on our plot. So it will be co-located with our farm, just to answer that question from the chat.
Thank you very much. I see another hand raised by, is that Dr. Khaled?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this nice presentation. I'm really happy to learn from these new technologies. I'm a plant molecular biologist and biotechnologist, so I'm outsider. So, but I'm really very interested to know this new technology, and I'm pretty sure that this is the future for the UAE in terms of indoor agriculture that will be one partner for food security. This is for sure, no doubt about that. So my concern is about energy efficiency, and I'm wondering if indoor agriculture and 100% controlled structure will consume huge energy. And are you thinking to add any solar panels to reduce the cost, or any other kind of energy, of clean energy, and to participate in climate change mitigation and greenhouse and CO2 emission from the energy? Also, if I compare the normal greenhouses and the net houses, which are less sophisticated than the indoor, they consume really very low energy, and the price at the end is the most important, because to be sustainable you have to have benefit, you have to produce benefit, otherwise you will be not sustainable. And my second question is, I want to hear about this energy efficiency, using LED energy can reduce the consumption of energy, and how much we can get benefit and so on. The second question is about the tomato that you are going to grow, and this microgreen, and this is Cœur de Bœuf variety. Why you choose this variety? Maybe you have some specific consumer to tackle to provide this fruit for the specific consumer, or is it because it's very expensive, or I don't know. I want to hear from you about this selection, this choosing this variety, not other, not cherry varieties, cherry tomatoes, or whatever other tomatoes. Thank you.
Dr. Khaled, thank you for that very great question. To be honest, you set me up. I could probably talk for 1 more hour to address those 2 very relevant questions, to be honest. I'm a bit compressed for time, so I can give you a very quick answer. I'd love, if you want to connect with it afterwards, I'm sure Tatiana and Elke can share our contact details. I can give you a more in-depth response, but just to briefly touch on those 2 points.
I'm very happy to continue discussion later on in the future weeks, coming weeks and coming months. No problem.
Great. I just real quick, I'll give you a quick 30-second view on that question, then I'll have to drop off. I do have another meeting after this. Great question on energy intensity. So we've actually done this. We partnered with a postgrad student studying at Harvard last year to do a life cycle analysis on our whole facility, looking at the overall footprint. And that's taking everything into account from water pollution, ground pollution, carbon footprint, everything. I think there's 12 different factors in the life cycle analysis. And on a like-for-like basis, our farm, yes, it does have a higher footprint than a greenhouse coming from Western Europe or the US. But the reason it has a higher footprint is not directly because of electricity, it's because of how the electricity is generated in the UAE today. And that's something that we as an individual entity can't obviously influence. I mean, we do see the UAE is making tremendous investments in solar power, tremendous investments in nuclear as well. So our view is, as the grid itself in the UAE, as generation sources transfer from fossil fuels to renewables, by definition, as an end user, we become greener and less polluting. To answer the question around the solar panels, I get that question quite frequently. It seems like a very logical solution, but unfortunately, something a lot of people don't realize, PV panels have only very recently become carbon negative, and that is the amount of energy, amount of carbon it takes to make the PV panel is actually significant, considering, again, the energy inputs into those panels. So to have a, again, net positive product in a day, you need a really commercial scale, industrial scale facility for solar generation. And one more step to complicate that further is, when I need the power the most is when the sun is not shining, because my daytime in the farm is actually at nighttime outside to minimize my cooling costs. So then I have to have a massive battery facility storage. For a number of other reasons, unfortunately, it doesn't really work for us at our scale. So there's, again, a huge question of scale here. On the tomato variety selection, again, the simple version is we chose it for commercial reasons. There's a whole lot of commercial reasons underneath that, but it's not something I have time to get into this morning. I'd love to thank everybody for their time and attendance today. I do apologize, but I am already 5 minutes late for my next engagement. I'll have to drop off here.